Evening. Welcome to our second event in our Broadening Horizons in Preservation Heritage Cafe lecture series. This lecture is brought to you by the City of Tacoma Historic Preservation Office in conjunction with Historic Tacoma and the Tacoma Historical Society. I am Zoe Scuderi. I am the Historic Preservation Intern for the City of Tacoma. We are joined tonight by Kathleen Booker, who is board president of Historic Tacoma. Kathleen, would you like to say anything about your organization?
Well, thanks, Zoe. Historic Tacoma is an all-volunteer preservation advocacy organization. We have members and supporters and interested folks across Tacoma who are wanting to save the historic neighborhoods and places, churches, schools, and commercial places, because this is a great town with a lot of older buildings that people value. And so we try to help them keep that going.
And very true. On that, I have some information from the Tacoma Historical Society about a couple of events that showcase those things that we love about our city and the history of Tacoma. One being an exhibit called Timbertown that looks at Tacoma's early history and its wood product industry. And the exhibit focuses on the changes that mechanization brought to forestry in the 1920s and the different related industries that developed in Tacoma as a result. The other exhibit is being produced by the Sister Cities Council and will examine the 35-year history of the Tacoma Sister Cities program. A reminder that the Tacoma Historical Society has also moved and is now located at 406 Tacoma Ave South. And the Tacoma Historical Society would like to recognize the additional support received from Tacoma Creates for heritage education programs. So with that, let's get into tonight's education program. Tonight's lecture is presented by Kai Kelly, Executive Director of Historic Seattle, as well as Nicholas Carr, Director of Forterra, a Washington-based nonprofit land trust. So a little bit about our two speakers tonight. Kai has been described as the in-house real estate expert of Historic Seattle. He has worked in historic preservation field for 29 years. He began his career for he began his career working for the Pennsylvania Capital Preservation Committee, as well as the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources in the Historic Sites Division. He managed restoration projects at 27 historical sites throughout North Carolina in this position. He was project manager for the Facilities Management Department at Duke University, where he managed renovation and new construction projects on the early 20th century campus. He has a BA in American Studies and Political Science from Dickinson College and 2 certificates from the University of Washington, one in commercial real estate and the other in construction management. So Kai, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we jump into our conversation?
I'm just happy to be here, and I appreciate, Kathleen, you asking me to participate. This is an honor to talk to everybody.
I think we'll all enjoy hearing from both of you and having a conversation about the opportunities that real estate can provide for preservation. I meant to say that Historic Tacoma has just wrapped up a survey of the McKinley neighborhood and previously did a survey, historic building inventory of the Proctor Business District. And we hope that this will lay the groundwork for future advocacy.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, and then as well, we are also going to hear from Nicholas Carr with Forterra. Nicholas specializes in outreach, engagement, relationship building, and strategic facilitation of both conservation and community development projects. advanced by Forterra's mission to use land for good. His experience in both rural and urban communities as a political aide to Representative Derek Kilmer has led to innovative initiatives and community building actions throughout the western half of Washington state, with a focus on the rural coast. Nicholas brings those relationships and trust to his work on Forterra's real estate transaction team by playing a key role in developing the frameworks for conservation, the community revitalization, and development projects. Nick has worked extensively with cities on Washington's coast and throughout the South Sound, and in his hometown of Tacoma, in pursuit of each community's needs and to build viable coalitions to successfully implement the infrastructure necessary to achieve these goals. He has also played a key role in both the development and implementation of large conservation projects for the state of Washington and its many sovereign tribal nations. So with that, Nick, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we begin?
Nope, just echoing Kai. Happy to be here. Excited to be taking part in something in my hometown. I am a Tacoma boy. Went to college here, both bachelor's and master's at UW Tacoma. So I have a strong connection to the community and to this area. And more, I have a connection to the buildings and the historic properties that they entail, and what it means to people, what land and what buildings and what history and culture in an area means to people, and how it puts them in place. So I'm happy to be here to have a conversation with you all.
Excellent. All right. So on that, I just want to remind you guys that if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function in this Zoom meeting, and we'll be taking those questions and answering them at the end of the presentation. And if you are on Facebook, please ask any questions in the comments, and we will also address those. So with that, Kai or Nick, whoever wants to start, take us away. I think Kai, you've got your presentation set.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in first, if that's okay, Nick.
Absolutely. Take it away.
Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I have a board meeting here in a little bit. So when the topic was proposed and offered to me, presented to me, it's a pretty deep topic. I mean, we've got affordable housing, we've got PDA world, we've got TDRs, transfer development rights, we've got easements, we've got a lot of topics, and I could easily spend probably way too much time on each individual topic. But I put a few slides together just to sort of give an overview of Historic Seattle and what we've done over the nearly 50 years that we've been in existence. So with that, let me share the screen here. Hope everyone can see that. So as I just mentioned, we are a public development authority. The city of Seattle formed Historic Seattle back in 1973. So we're a couple years away from our 50th birthday. We also, in 1996, formed a nonprofit, a 501c3 foundation that really is the fundraising arm that helps to subsidize and underwrite a lot of the activities that the PDA takes on as an organization. As the logo indicates, fundamentally in this historic preservation space, we educate and we advocate and we preserve. The images on the slide are really meant to represent those three action items. We get into places that normally you don't get into, and we provide an education opportunity, an education platform to learn about other people and learn about other people's history. And the center photograph really does sort of represent, at least in my mind, that it does take a community to advocate for things and to really underscore that places really do matter for people in the community. And then lastly, we do swing a hammer, so to speak, literally and physically. We do save buildings and we do preserve buildings. This is Washington Hall when we reopened the building after we preserved it and saved it. There was a reopening event in 2016. So Public development authorities. We have probably a 3-page portion of our charter. I'm probably not exaggerating that. A 3-page portion of our charter that's dedicated just to things that we can do, sort of enabling type of language. The first 3 bullet points here just really sort of codify, if you will, our role in education and advocacy and real estate. The last 4 are just tools that we, use. I wouldn't say all the time. I wouldn't say always effectively, but we are provided these tools by the city to really help accomplish our education, advocacy, and real estate work. We're able to accept gifts. We're able to have some more official government relationship than just a sort of sideline organization that's always lobbying, if you will, the city. We are able to take advantage of advantageous financing tools that the city often uses, such as bonding. And we are able to receive property from the city through a deaccessioning process. Our first project that we really sort of got our hands involved with and still own was the Good Shepherd Center. And that was a property back in the mid-70s that we received with cash from the city. So there's some good tools that we utilize as a PDA to help underscore and underwrite and support our activities in our education, advocacy, and real estate world. Our mission statement. We were really intentional when we created this several years ago. Historic Seattle saves meaningful places to foster lively communities. We really see the word saves as an action, as a verb, as an action word. We are unlike a lot of organizations across the country in that we do real estate. And I'll go into how we do it here in a second. But we see it as an action-oriented passion of ours. Meaningful. We don't say we save National Register properties or City of Seattle landmark properties. They're meaningful. And meaningfulness, is different for different people. But we want to allow that room to explore properties in our region that are meaningful to people, and we want to try to save them. Obviously, we're a place-based organization, and we want to foster. The work that we do is really more of an incubator or a stewardship, or it's a fostering type of activity that we do, allowing people to partake in the activity of saving history and bringing it to life. Lively. We're not a house museum. We don't own house museums. Only on rare occasions do I dress up in like Victorian garb at the office. We are focused on, saving places for people to use actively. Great places to live, work, and play. And communities, plural. It's not a monolithic activity that we do for a singular, for white men, right? We recognize that we are one part of a larger story that is Seattle, and our role at Historic Seattle is to honor and tell that full story. So what does real estate, why is it important? Why are we here talking about this? Why am I privileged to be able to talk about what Historic Seattle does in the real estate space? Obviously, it's an embodiment of our mission. We are privileged and lucky to have real estate as the largest income source for us. Rent that we generate from our properties pays our bills. It's also the second largest expense. And for us, it really is, I view it as the greatest either opportunity for success, which we've had a lot of, or failure. You don't watch what you're doing, you can get sideways. Another way to sort of look and sort of understand how real estate plays importance to Historic Seattle is just by numbers. We have 8 properties. Those properties generate rent. That's 89% of our $3 million annual operating budget. We have 21 staff members. 6 of those staff members are caretakers at our properties. And right now we have about a $26 million balance sheet. So as you can tell from those 5 numbers, Real estate plays a big role in what we do and how we do it, and it helps underwrite and support the other two activities with education and advocacy. It's really a combined effort. So I'll get into the portfolio here in a second, but really the main points of emphasis that I want to stress, each one of our properties is very different. We have multiple partners, funders, tenants. Nearly all of them have, strange restrictions, unusual ownership structures. Nothing is cookie cutter, nothing is simple. I think that's the one thing I've learned in nearly 30 years of doing this. We also have easements. There was a time when historic Seattle, I think because of the cheaper, if you will, price for real estate, particularly in Seattle, we were able to purchase, rehab, and sell. We had sort of a revolving fund model where we take sales proceeds from one property, invest in another. Every time we do that transaction, we place an easement. So right now, historic Seattle has about 25 easements on properties throughout the region, mostly in Seattle. So these are the 8 properties in our portfolio now. Top left is the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford. Next to that is the Cadillac Hotel down in Pioneer Square. The triangular funky building there, a mid-century modern single-family house called the Egan House on Lakeview Boulevard, right below St. Mark's Church. Middle row left is Washington Hall, project I'll talk about here in a second. The Dearborn House is our headquarters. That's to the right of Washington Hall. Bottom left is Victorian Row. It's a 14-unit affordable housing project. Middle bottom is Bellboy Apartments, which is a 16-unit and 1 market rate affordable housing project that I'll talk about briefly. And bottom right is Hegg Phillips, another affordable housing project with 11 units of affordable housing. So just a lot of information and facts here. You may note that a lot of these buildings were built at the turn of the century. And there's some outliers here, obviously, Egan House being sort of the mid-century 1958 house. And a lot of the properties that we invested in and picked up over time were done in the early 90s, the affordable housing projects particularly. A lot of those improvements now are toward their end of their useful life, and we need to continue to reinvest in those specifically. But those are the projects and properties in our portfolio. By size, clearly Good Shepherd Center is the largest, with a pretty even distribution across the portfolio. We don't just obviously focus on size, but we focus on use. I will say that the biggest takeaway for me through COVID was this diversification. We'd be, quite honestly, in a world of hurt as an organization if we relied just on performance space as an income generator. 89% of our revenue comes from rent. If we relied on, say, performance space, we wouldn't nearly be receiving as much rent as we have been throughout the pandemic. So the diversification of the portfolio has been a real asset for us during these times of trouble. Also, community served, a really nice spread across different organizations, across different communities that we provide valuable historic space to. Too much information on this, but I put it here just to underscore the complexity that each one of our properties carries. They have new market tax credits, historic tax credits, low income tax credits, serving dozens, almost 50 affordable housing units, all at different income levels, all different ownership structures. Yeah, as I said, nothing's easy. All of the deals are complex in their own certain way. So I'll talk about 2 projects. Bellboy Apartments, as I mentioned, 16 units of affordable housing with 1 market rate unit. It's a really early example of a project we did in the early 90s that twinned historic and low income tax credits. I don't think there were a lot of organizations at the time that were doing that type of twinned deal. What we did was actually bought and saved all 6 of these. That's the reason why I put the site plan here. All 6 of these properties, A, B, C, D, and E, and F, were all in the same project bundle. And so we saved them all. We invested a lot of money to rehab them. Each one of them had different income compliance levels, ownership structures. We sold buildings B, C, D, E, and F in the mid 2000s. It was like 2007, 2008. And that afforded us the ability to purchase the next project that I'll talk about, Washington Hall. But Bellboy was one property that we kept of the 6 because the low income compliance period is for another, I think it's till 2045, 2050. So it's an extended amount of compliance that we need to retain that property. But they provide, 150 square foot units with shared baths, targeting 30% area median income. And right now in Seattle, that's just over $22,000. The apartment building's located up on Capitol Hill, which is a phenomenal location. And each unit rents for about $625 a month. So it's been a great property for us. Yeah, we try, back to my original statement about embodying mission. Affordable housing is clearly an issue in Seattle, and we really love to try to utilize our affordable housing properties as a tangible way to demonstrate that you can save historic buildings and provide affordable housing. It's not either or. We don't have to tear down historic building stock in order to build monolithic shoebox buildings and jam people in 50 square foot micro units. That's not what we do. It turns my stomach when I see it. Obviously, this sort of work that twins both historic, saving historic properties and providing affordable places for people to live can be done. And we like to demonstrate that in the projects that we have. So as I mentioned, we sold 5 of the 6 for $1.5 million. And we took that $1.5 million and we bought this building. This was back, we purchased Washington Hall. This obviously is not a contemporary photo. It's from the 30s, assessor photo. There's sort of a current photo with snow on the ground. But that's Washington Hall. It's located at 14th and Fir in the Central District. It's very familiar to Kathleen. I think this was like the big project on the plate when Kathleen became executive director a few years ago, before me. But Washington Hall, as we say and continue to say, it's a hall for all and a hall for notables. It was the first public performance space that hosted Jimi Hendrix. First place where he played in public. It provided a venue for African-American artists that would come into Seattle that couldn't play other places, could always play at Washington Hall. It's also hall for all. I mean, it's always been since the early 1900s, a place where community could get together and celebrate and create and protest and gather. It's always been like that, and it always will be like that because of Historic Seattle's effort and because of our anchor partner effort to save this space in this building. Purchased in 2009 for 1.5. We went through 5 phases of construction, $7.9 million total. A really hard campaign to raise money. I'll show you the capital stack here, but it took 10 years. It took a while to put all that. It was not easy. It was worth it in the end, but it was not easy. Thanks to Kathleen's leadership at the time to get us over that hump and get us through that. We ran a rental program, even in the as-is condition the building was in. We had squatters, we had pigeons, we had no heat, we had faulty electrical system, we had unsafe life safety systems, we had a south wall that was ready to fall into the sidewalk.
And don't forget the big hole in the roof.
A big hole right before we closed. The roof came down in the main hall right here because of water. Yeah. So through all of that, through all the phases of construction, we are able to run a rental program, if nothing else, to show that the building had integrity, the mission had integrity, that there was a vision for the hall. We lost money in the rental program. You know, we'd offered the space for $25 an hour, and it probably cost us $50 an hour. So on paper, it wasn't, you know, wasn't in the black, but it was something that was a proof of concept and showed people that it was worth investing in. We executed leases with 3 anchor partners that are well below market leases. They're triple net leases, and those leases were executed in 2016. I use the word anchor partners intentionally because they're not just tenants. You know, I think the most important thing about Washington Hall for me personally was it really did make me a better person. I don't say that very often about too many things, honestly, but this project did, in that it made me listen. It made me shut up and listen to other people and take into consideration other perspectives. And the folks that we worked with on this project were more than just tenants to us. They really were partners in providing a heart and soul to the building, above and beyond our effort just to save the bones. They really provided the life to the building and do to this day. So we certainly had some knowns and unknowns associated with the work, as Kathleen alluded to. The bottom left picture, this was guys digging out the elevator pit. The elevator, we knew the elevator pit was actually below the water table. So that's actually mud that's being collected as they're digging out. They're having to dewater and deal with all the water that's coming in from the ground. There was also water coming in from above, from the roof leaks, creating a lot of mold throughout the building that you see in the second from the left photo. And so that was very apparent. And then there were obviously, with that water infiltration, a lot of areas of the building that were structurally unsound that were not apparent until you peeled off brick or, you know, plaster, that sort of thing. There was certainly structural issues here with the post and many other areas of structure that were deficient that needed to be repaired. And then there were previous owner repairs. I like to say this is structural duct tape, but it's actually duct tape that's been painted on the bottom side of the balcony here as a repair, just to try to keep some of the balcony, I guess, together, so to speak. Our capital stack, as you can see, you know, pretty even distribution. We did receive new market tax credit equity, was $2.6 million. That was really the big tranche of money that came in at just the right time that really started to put us over the hump and get us into a substantial rehab phase to save the project. About $1 million in foundation grants, public grants, another $4 million, and our 1.7 in equity. So here's just some photographs. I've never been to a work site where the construction crews look like this, by the way. It looks awfully staged to me, but it does give an impression of what was going on at the time. If you notice this big crack here over the exit sign, that crack in the plaster happened when we actually leveled out and jacked up the floor here underneath the exit sign. It was about 1.5 inches to 2 inches out of level. And when we jacked and sort of, when the building moved and came to its new settle, something had to give. we saw that the plaster was what gave. So that's all been repaired. This is a photo from behind the stage, as you see stage on the right. We had to figure out how to put a new elevator in. It was sort of threading the needle. The front of the building was at a different elevation than the back. We needed to get the elevator from the basement to the third floor to the balcony space. We needed to load stuff in. We needed to get people around. And so we really had to be creative in how we threaded the needle and put this elevator in the building. A lot of new structure, a lot of new steel you see throughout. None of that's seen now. Now you sort of walk through, and the beauty of preservation is that now you can walk through it and you didn't even realize that any of this new stuff is there. It's all been buried, and it all sort of harmoniously flows together. This is, I believe, either second or third floor in the back of the building. Front of the building is public assembly space. The back is private office, recording studio, classroom space. We tried to keep as much of the original fabric framing as we could, but we sort of reconfigured some of the interstitial and interior spaces for new use. Always need to have a dramatic danger photo in a presentation, and this was Washington Hall during construction. Reopening, I mean, this photo for me at least, or photos really represent the bringing back the hall for the community. It's really always nice for me to, go over there, not so much in the past year and a half, but before COVID, going over there and just sort of sitting in a seat off to the side, hiding in the corner or something. It's really fun just to sit and watch people use the building and enjoy the building, and whether they understand the history behind the building or not, it's their building. They do take a pride of ownership that is very meaningful. I know it was meaningful for Kathleen when she spent a lot of time there, and it was certainly meaningful for me to this day, going over and seeing the building used in really creative ways by community members. I think I'll end on this. It really does take a team of people, no matter what tools you're talking about, whether it's TDRs or working in an affordable housing space or trying to do stuff like at Washington Hall. It really does take a team of just people that care. And I get emotional about stuff on a pretty regular basis. And the one thing that does make me emotional is when I work with people that give a damn, that work with purpose and work with a mission to achieve something greater than themselves. And Washington Hall for Historic Seattle was that project. And we're fortunate and privileged to be able to look at new projects now. We probably have 2 or 3 that we're looking at actively purchasing right now. And we're always looking for the next Washington Hall, creating affordable space for a community that really underscores what we do as an organization to save meaningful places for fostering lively communities. So with that, Zoe, do we want to take questions now if I need to jump, or I'm certainly happy I can stay around, looks like for another half hour. So I think we're good on time.
I think maybe.
Oh, go ahead, Kathleen.
I was just going to say, I'd like to get over to Nick and do some compare and contrast with real estate strategies, because Forterra's done a lot of great work with partnerships also, but I think utilizing different kinds of tools than the Development Authority has. But Zoe,
some the same, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment, so I think that we're ready to transition. I just wanted to make a mention, since you're headed off, that the only thing that one of the things that I thought of with Washington Hall, I believe it's located in the Central District of Seattle. And there is a great exhibit that Mohi did a couple years back. And they have it's part of their collections of Al Smith, who was a photographer and photographed a lot of the Black and Asian experience, the jazz scene in the Central District in the 1920s. And I was looking at some of those photos of Washington Hall, and I wonder if he happened to go there and take some photos, because it looked like a bouncing place for that time period, and probably a meeting place where a lot of jazz people came and hung out, but a nice connection to other Seattle history. So I'm interested in that building. Very cool. Other than that, Kai, thank you so much for everything on that. Stick around if you have time to see what Nick has to say, but yeah, either way, thank you. And I'm sure that we'll have a lot of questions at the end. Nick, do you want to bring us along with what you have?
Sure. I have a presentation as well. I'll try to blow through it relatively quick. There are a lot of similarities and some differences, and some different focus in certain areas. So I'll see what I can do here. And about 1 second, I'm going to share it on a different screen because it's not working the way I want it to that way. Okay. There we go. That's what I was looking for. All right. So real quick, I'll just go through, Forterra itself. We're a Washington-based nonprofit. We enhance, support, and steward the region's most precious resource, its communities and its ecosystems. Forterra conserves and stewards land, develops innovative policies, and supports sustainable and rural and urban development. It's pretty flowery. People wonder why a land trust, which typically is conserving, forest, fish, and farm, is delving into affordable/attainable housing, urban development, and potentially in certain cases historic preservation. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a recognition now in a kind of a change that we went through, that we can't effectively grow in a region like the South Sound or Western Washington and keep conservation and wild places and ecosystems healthy without also recognizing that people live in cities and towns, and those have to be robust and healthy and places of importance too. So we made a decision to maybe delve into the urban world and see if there's a way that we could change the definition of conservation, essentially, to include people in the places where they live, not just where they want to go hike, right? So that's Forterra in a nutshell. There's probably more to it, but we'll leave it at that at the moment. I'm going to talk about a couple things in an overview. One is community preservation, and one is attainable housing, and so we'll kind of dig into that real quick. So, community preservation. Community preservation, basically, from our point of view, is a recognition of the cultural and historic meaning that community is assigned to land and buildings in the places, where we work, where Forterra works, and where people live. This dynamic often represents family, purpose, pride. It gives voice to the people living in the places that they love. Historic preservation is a really important component of that holistic work, right? It offers a strong anchor from which we can pursue community-driven design, ensuring the communities and where we work have a say in what and how we do what we do. Often, I have a community planning background. Often, the old school version of, asking a community what it would like from, from its buildings and its spaces that it congregates is design one or two, go away after you make a decision, right? And there's not really a sense of ownership for a community that wants to come in and actually maybe make a decision on what actually goes there. Maybe they don't want housing. Maybe they don't, there's a really strong history of, and Kai alluded to this, of what white men feel is best for a community. And we're trying to get away from that and understand that there are places that mean something to people and that we should take them at their word and learn about what that history entails and figure out how to produce what we need to produce for growth, but in an optic, in a view that, we don't always have the best answers. And sometimes we need to be able to preserve what a community feels is important, right? And so within this effort, we've mobilized resources and our skills to do urban work and with community inspired development, right? And so whether that's transforming, underused areas into hub for housing, business, and transportation at Everett Station, which is a project we're working on, or a mixed use and attainable housing development that we're working on currently in Tacoma's Hilltop, or Wadajir residences in Souk and Tukwila for the Somali community, or the reclamation of the Nettie Asbury home in the Hilltop, which I'll talk more about later. We have a view that historic preservation is a key component, but it's really about community preservation that really brings this home for us. And in that vein, we're looking at attainable housing as as both a way to preserve community, but also to tackle problems that we have, right? So our goal, for attainable housing is basically ownership and rental housing that's priced at 60% of AMI. For example, in 2020 numbers in Pierce County, 60% of AMI is a family making about $48,000 a year. That means their housing cost should be no more than about $1,200 a month. That's, anybody who owns or rents a home in Tacoma or Seattle knows that that's not typically what your, what market's going to offer you, right? So how do we do that, right? So we go for kind of a classic land trust model of land banking, where we partner with communities to acquire property. We develop a social impact investing model where investors recognize their investment is not about a return, but about social and good community benefits as a return in lieu of strict fiscal returns. We use innovative construction methods like modular construction with mass timber for sustainable affordability at reduced costs. And then we have a cooperative ownership model, right, that basically brings ownership equity to a community that is attainable now and will stay attainable in the future because it's based on a land bank trust model. And from a pre-development advisory council and community input to post-closing governance, we've committed to community partnerships and equitable engagement every step of the way, right, in the development and the design process. And so that's kind of the spirit of the community-driven design for our attainable housing that we've started to pursue. And how do we do this, right? So what are the funding and the incentives that allow us to kind of get to where we're at, right? So the first is land banking and buy and holds. And land banking is basically working with a community or collective to purchase land in anticipation of stabilizing costs for the benefit of the said community or collective in pursuit of a beneficial outcome. Often this is housing, but it's not limited to housing in any shape or form. Land trusts have used this for a very long time, use this as a tool to protect land and facilitate those outcomes for partners who may be unable to pursue an acquisition on their own at that immediate time. And land banking in this vein is also referred to as a buy and hold, right? This can happen with conservation land, this can happen with housing, with community space in an urban area, whatever. We're able to use land banking as a tool to prevent either an unwanted sale, demolition of a building, or unwanted future use of a property with adequate funding and planned repayment from interested stakeholders and partners. So we can do that through grants, through loans, through the impact investment funds, and through philanthropy. Another thing that we use obviously here is grants and appropriations. Historically grants are used, whether they're state, private, or federal, to do a lot of work nonprofits facilitate or public entities like PDAs facilitate. So it's pretty typical. In historic preservation, this means a couple of things, right? You can use competitive grant funding allocated specifically for what we think of as historic preservation, funding like the Heritage Capital Program at the state level, or national programs like the Historic Preservation Fund administered by the National Park Service. But we can also use competitive grant funding to pursue specific actions on a historic preservation project, but it's not necessarily tied to historic preservation generally. So there's ways you can leverage funding to do this kinds of work. And in that vein, you can leverage funds garnered for a specific community preservation purpose through an appropriation like Governor Inslee's social justice appropriation budget, which is where we got money for the Asbury acquisition, which is specified to a project that may or may not need or include historic preservation, but is geared at community preservation generally. So if the pursuit of community preservation becomes a focus of historic preservation, then I think the opportunities for funding specific brick and mortar projects may increase depending on how you look at it or how those grants or appropriations are designed. Transfer and development rights is an interesting thing. This is something you wouldn't typically think of when we're thinking about historic preservation, but maybe later we can get to the opportunities here. But very briefly, transfer development rights works. We have a bundle of sticks. This is kind of how you explain how real estate works, right? When you own a piece of property, typically you own, mining rights, air rights in some cases, right? Development rights. Can you tear this thing down and build more density? Rights to use water rights. There's a number of rights associated with property, right? So when you're looking at a farm or forest and you're trying to prevent development from sprawling out of our urban areas into suburban areas and exurban areas and taking up farms and forests and natural areas that we want to preserve, there are development rights associated with those properties based on the kind of zoning that those properties are under. So essentially what you do is you buy these development rights. That brings the price of the property down because those development rights are going into a city, a bucket that the city can then use to incentivize higher density and growth within urban areas where we want growth to happen versus out in the exurban and suburban areas where we want to limit that so we can have, healthy fish and healthy streams and forests and things like that. So that's a very crash course on transfer development rights. It's basically providing money for conservation by using targeted zoning in areas that we want to build. So for Tacoma in particular, right, this is an interesting thing and trying to figure out how we use TDR to promote affordable housing and potentially historic preservation. So in the scenario one, the city of Tacoma's development regulations currently offer a menu of options for developers to gain bonus height and density, which increases rentals and things like that in the city. The list may contain choices that aren't priced equally, with a subjective argument that the public benefit of the choices are also not weighted equally, right? So, for example, all things being equal, the developer will probably pick an inexpensive benefit to gain a bonus building development height, like adding building design elements or doing something they were already planning on doing, like residential use, which is an incentive, rather than choosing something like TDR or affordable housing, which has, in our opinion, a higher public benefit, so we argue we're offering a better public benefit through those incentives than the other ones, but they're not weighted in a way that incentivizes developers to use them more, right? So in the second scenario, you see, there's an opportunity potentially to change this and have the city ensure that all new construction using incentives development program will include both affordable housing and TDR in some proportion. And then, a council would establish, and this would result in more consistent delivery of high value public benefits with redevelopment opportunities. The more choices you offer, the less predictability there is in terms of what actually gets built, right? So with fewer choices, you're more likely to get the kind of development you want or community wants by more effectively connecting demand for growth with affordable housing and locating growth in your jobs, schools, businesses, and infrastructure. It's also important to bear in mind that the incentive zoning is illustrating the example is only one of many approaches, right? This is just kind of like a off the cuff, like this is something you could do to achieving these public benefits. To effectively deliver a wide range of benefits, the city needs a comprehensive, diversified strategy. So there's how do we put historic preservation in this context or community preservation in this context, right? So you have scenario 3 potentially, and for those of you, I know this is the Luzon building. I know this is a very sore subject in Tacoma, but I wanted to make a point that, buildings are very important, and with the right incentives, you may be able to avoid tearing amazing buildings like the Luzon building down for no good reason. So this third scenario here is a builder uses the city's new incentive zoning program to redevelop a historically significant building by purchasing TDR credits, ensuring a minimum amount of affordable housing, and that minimum can be a very high minimum if we decide that, rather than pursuing a demolition permit or building elsewhere, and is offered a bonus benefit for combining those incentives in such a way that makes the development worth doing. So this is actually what Kai was talking about, right? Which is like, you don't have to have historic preservation or affordable housing. You can figure out a way to incentivize, building affordable housing or attainable housing within, right, a historic preservation, and you can incentivize that. Right now, some people may say, well, there's not enough room in a historic building. Saving a historic building does not preclude that you can't, build adjacent to it or over a certain floor or something like that, so that you're still, preserving the integrity of the structure that you're trying to preserve. But there's ways that you can also remodel, and add to and come up with a way that you can actually increase that density where it may not be offered in a smaller building. But we don't need to go into that argument at the moment. So the idea basically is to incentivize, historic preservation rehab development by granting higher densities through the use of TDR and affordable housing incentives. That could effectively be a really good combination of tools, right? I feel like I'm going a little long, and I don't want to blow through too much. I want to talk about LCLIP, but I think it's a little bit too in the weeds right now. So I'm going to go straight. I can take questions later, and we can also share the presentation. But I want to talk about some examples of what we're doing here in Tacoma. So we have one TDR example that was recently done here in Tacoma. The farmland from the Rice Farm here is owned by PCC Farmland Trust at the moment. It's currently being leased to 4 Elements Farm. Prior to leasing the farm, the farmers were finding a difficult time locating land in the county to farm on, especially with water rights still intact. So transferring the development rights from the property allowed for the farmers to utilize land they would not have previously been able to afford. The family farm is currently growing a variety of 50 crops and employing 5 people rather than being a suburban subdivision, right? The purchase of the 4 TDR credits for $38,000 allowed 21 additional units to be added to the Stadium Apartments projects, which recently completed a couple of years ago. So this adds 2 stories to the mixed-use complex that was already going in, being located in the Stadium District. The purchase of the 4 TDR credits increased the cost of the building by about 17 cents per square foot, or about $220 per unit. So it's a good deal. Although this was the first TDR attraction in Pierce County, the developers stated they had no hesitation using the program. The parcel is located on a compact lot. Increasing the amount of airspace utilized made the project financially feasible, right? So the TDR allowed for a bonus height increase, the lowest cost of the bottom line. The Carino and Associates, who did the development, also see the use of TDR as an opportunity to contribute to conserving land in the county, which has a lasting impact and creates a good story. So we know that this works. We know it works in Seattle. Seattle's been using TDR very effectively for a very long time. We're trying to pursue and push better and more effective use in Pierce County and Tacoma. Some other examples of what we're doing in attainable housing is Hilltop, right? This is a deal that we're designing right now with the community. It was purchased in 2019 using the land bank model that I went over earlier. It's a 2-year community engagement effort so far with a local investment council that we invited people to participate in, leading the design efforts. It's a community inspired design through and through. We're pioneering an attainable housing co-op housing model using cross-laminated timber, which is sourced from rural areas. The community preservation and recognition of this project, includes things like celebrating Hilltop Artist Commissions, which are currently working in the space as an art studio to produce art locally, local produced art that will then be in the eventual development. Tacoma Urban Performing Arts Center, TUPAC, is located in there and does youth dancing and production for the community. And the parking lot and area houses the Bite of Black business events. So even before this development goes up, we're trying to activate and use this site to preserve community efforts to have events and art and basically activating the space, which is an old Rite Aid that's been abandoned for a very long time. The last one I'll go over is the Gem, is my most favorite one. This is the Asbury home, which is a historic home in Tacoma's Hilltop. It's 130 years old, predates Washington statehood. It's a historic and cultural landmark, both locally and nationally. We expect it to be national. The property symbolizes the proud and important history of the Black community in Tacoma's Hilltop, which is older than the home itself. It's a 150-year-old community. It was the home of Dr. Nettie Asbury and her husband, Henry Asbury, bought in 1903. It was one of many real estate holdings owned by them. They're kind of a Black power couple in the early 20th century. And Nettie Asbury is a national gem, right? She's known for her music room where she taught local youth and remembered for the large backdoor gatherings in the community. She's believed to be the first African-American woman in this country to receive a PhD, has studied overseas, studied music overseas. She's a civil rights leader in Tacoma. It's a very important recognition of the importance of the Hilltop community and the power and the influence that it had over our history in Tacoma. And so we're working to acquire this property on behalf of and with the Colored Women's Club in Tacoma, which is actually was an organization founded locally by Nettie Asbury. And so that we can ensure that piece of land and that property, which is ultimately developable, that it stays as a historic piece and a reminder and an active space for the Black community in Tacoma's Hilltop, whether it's as a museum or a event space or just something else. We don't know. That's going to be a process that we work through with the CWC into the future. That's going to be decided by the community. But we had the expertise to come in and help make sure that it was protected and that it was not ever going to be torn down or developed. So we are super happy to be working on this project, and honestly, right in the middle of it right now. So I can't say too much more, but it is moving, and it has been a really, really fantastic opportunity. I have 2 more slides. I kind of want to bring things home and connect things home here. So the Forest to Home initiative is kind of how this attainable housing thing wraps up for communities, right? We're talking about delivering affordable housing from local craftsmen and local timber. It's a triple bottom line of social equity, responsible forest management, and economic development made possible by modular development of cross-laminated timber. This creates jobs for rural timber communities, modernizes building methods, and alleviates financial burdens for home buyers. And the whole point is that we're able to come in with a land bank model, preserve a community asset, whether it's a piece of land or a building, and then utilize this forest to home model to either add to or to build new if necessary, depending on, because sometimes it's not the building, it's the land, right? So with the Rite Aid building on Hilltop, the community is not enamored with the Rite Aid building. That's not the issue. The issue is that it is a key piece of land that's in the, the historically Black commercial business district on Martin Luther King Jr. Way down, on Hilltop. And that has been a blight on that community for a very long time because Rite Aid took off, right? So it's not always about a building, it's about a piece of land. And if we can build something with the community on that land, right, we see that as a really strong argument to ensure that community preservation is taken seriously. The last piece of connection, I have a couple of questions here that are just kind of like thought questions for people to think about in this, in the context of the stuff we've talked about here. How do we ensure sustainable redevelopment in our cities using innovative incentives and policy to prevent sprawl, conserve critical lands, and grow, while retaining our cultural centers and affordability, right? Because like Kai was talking about, often we're thinking that that's not doable, that we actually, we can't actually conserve everything that we want to conserve, prevent sprawl, but also retain our culture and our historic buildings in our cities while we grow, because either we grow out or we grow up. But we think we can do that together, right? And secondly, if we think about that first question, how do we recognize and foster community and historic preservation as a component of our city's futures while developing into that growth that we know it's going to happen? So how do we actually focus on community and historic preservation in that mode, right? We're not going to answer that today, but I just wanted to make sure everybody had kind of some things to think about as they left this conversation. So that is all I have. I will stop sharing my screen.
I was actually going to say, if you wanted to leave that up, we could.
I can also leave that up if you'd like. It's up to you.
Yeah. Before, I wanted to quickly jump in because Kai, I know that you are getting ready to leave, but this is a question that came up in the Q&A, which is how do you determine which buildings to take on as projects and properties? And this is for both of you, but Kai, if you wanted to answer before you head off.
We've struggled with that for almost 50 years. I mean, we've had notions of creating some sort of project selection criteria, a filter. You throw everything in the top of the funnel and you shake it around and you see what comes out the bottom.
Some sort of matrix, yeah.
Yeah, we've been playing with that. We're working toward that. But fundamentally, I think you know it when you see it. We approach things, and maybe it's just me. I approach things with head and heart, right? It's gotta mean something sort of emotionally and in your heart. There's got to be a connection there that you can actually feel, and then you got to justify it. Then you have to do a pro forma, and then you have to do a sources and uses, and then you got to bring in experts that actually know if the building's in good shape or not, or you bring in zoning experts. You start using your head to justify what your heart feels. That for me is my project selection criteria, for better or worse. That's how we tend to do it. But we have been working on a criteria of some sort that takes into consideration just, evaluation of risk, cost to capital, use, location, zoning, all the typical real estate, sort of parameters that you'd look at. But for us, there's really no hard and fast answer. I know Nick is different. Nick has his acting. He's got it all.
At the risk of saying ditto, it's hard, right? Often there's too many factors. Really, you have to weigh and balance so many different things. At the outset, I'll say that often it's a community that brings us, whether it's a community or a landowner specifically, brings us an opportunity. It's very rare that we're actively or proactively sourcing things. I would love to be able to do so, but there's so much, there's so much need and so much interest that we often find ourselves turning people away more than not, because there's so much, like I said, there's so much interest in kind of what we do and how we manage that. When you get to a place that your heart says, okay, this is it. And for Asbury, that's what it was for me, right? I mean, I talked to Cynthia Tucker and Marshall McClintock, and I thought that this is it. I'm not letting this one go, right? So some of those hit you, and you got it. You have to justify it. You don't give yourself a choice. And I did. I did justify it, and I figured it out. And most of that was what Kai said, right? You find the funding, you figure out how you're going to do it. You negotiate with the landowner. You're looking at grants. You're looking at appropriations. You're trying to figure out, your timelines. But other times it's a little bit more logical, and a lot of that is less about that when somebody's thinking about a place that they live and walk past every day, and it's more about you're looking at that matrix that I mentioned, right? You have kind of like, well, we work a lot in the Chehalis Basin, right? I work in the Chehalis Basin a ton on conservation property. The state comes to us and says we have this effort. We're doing 300 to 500 miles of restoration in the Chehalis Basin. We want an option for landowners who participate in the restoration to have compensation through either an easement or a fee acquisition. In that case, you have kind of set parameters that are easy to get to. And if you don't get a landowner on board, it's not like a heartbreaking thing because you were going to them. But that doesn't happen very often. A lot of times it's people coming to us and we have to weigh the good with the bad and the cost benefit. Like, is this going to, who's going to pay for the stewardship of this property? Stewardship's always the linchpin, right? Like I could get all kinds of stuff pushed forward with the landowner. I could get the grant funding. And then if we can't find the $50K it takes to manage that property in perpetuity to put in our endowment, it's a really hard sell, because a lot of what you risk when you go forward with your heart and you do really good projects, but then you have a portfolio of land that you cannot take care of, that actually pisses people off a hell of a lot more than not doing it in the first place, right? I to anybody who's my state agency friends on this call, I apologize, but that is the big dig against state agencies owning land, is when you own too much and you're at the whim of budgets that do this based on who's in office. Often your down budgets means you're not taking care of your properties, and then you have thousands and thousands of acres of wildfires for years and years and years, right? Now that isn't necessarily a direct correlation to like an urban stewardship, but the idea is similar, so like I said, I'm just rambling now. Basically ditto is what I said.
I think those are both wonderful answers, and it was an important question, which I appreciate being asked. At the end of the day, it's really about partnerships out there, how you can establish those relationships in the community, because we all know that people who live in a place specifically have very deep ties to it. And when they come to us with an issue or a problem or a concern, that's a really great place to start.
Going off of that a little bit, and in the question of partnerships, especially in relation to community partnerships, one of the questions, or one of the things that I noticed that both of you mentioned in your talk was it's sort of that relation of equity in project development, and how you're trying to listen to people and have it from a perspective of what the community actively needs and is saying that they want. What kind of strategies do you guys use to do that connection with the community and development of your projects?
So that's, it's funny because you think of a model of public meetings or community-led meetings, and typically you're still limited in some shape or fashion to that style of broad outreach after you've solidified maybe kind of a core group of people who are interested, who maybe brought your project. So whether it's organization or a city, typically where you fall short is the limitations of being able to truly broaden and figure out what people want, because often a minority will be very loud and a majority will be very, very quiet. But not only that, we also, when it comes to urban development specifically, we also have kind of a suite of things that we do. And we kind of follow that path unintentionally in a lot of ways, right? When people say, well, you know what I really want? I really want a soccer field on top of a roof. People are like, well, that's crazy. But like at the end of the day, is it really that crazy? And the thing is, we just don't, it's not in our lexicon, right? So, and I don't know why that just came up from him, a soccer player, I guess why, but I think what it takes is trust and listening, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to trust that people that have been living for generations in an area know what they need, right? Now, sometimes you are left with decisions. Is this going to be housing? Yes, we know it's going to be housing. Okay, if that's the case, how can we provide the most maximum flexibility for other amenities, open space, how the housing is designed, right? If you're limited to a structure, you know it's going to be this. Well, then how can we make sure that that structure is if it's going to be housing, but that the housing is solely developed in view of the public and the people are going to be living there. It's not easy because you have to make a conscious effort to do so. And it has to be, it's kind of like like my old boss would say, it's turning a battleship, right? You just, eventually it turns, but it takes a long time.
I think for Historic Seattle, it's really intentional and not performative when we engage people. Things like a thoughtful land acknowledgement at the beginning of our education programs and our meetings. We are a place-based history organization, and for us not to acknowledge that we're on other people's land, Native American tribal land, is crazy. We do that. Having people having diversity on our council and our foundation board. We've made an intentional effort to bring people from different backgrounds on our board and council. Our advocacy work is very intentional with specific outreach to traditionally disenfranchised communities in Seattle. Our education programming has really turned, from stories of dead old white guys with the oldest house on the hill, right? I mean, to put it bluntly, to telling the full Seattle story in all its forms and fashions and shapes and colors and sizes. So for us, it really is an honest and intentional effort to engage people and to earn respect rather than just doing performative things that make me feel better.
I think that's really important, what Kai said. And I think it's also important just to back that up and to acknowledge that the history of, and for a land trust specifically, I'm not putting Historic Seattle in this purview necessarily, but the history of land conservation of land trusts is a history of white supremacy, point blank, period. We're talking about land accumulation and land recreation and use for certain people, and that benefit and that view that it is for us. And that does not make any of us white supremacists, right? But it is, when we talk about how we engage the public and how we engage the community, and it's kind of like a pathway that's been set for a long time and it's hard to get off it. It's the same exact thing with land trusts. It's just, it's a history that you have to reconcile and we have to change and acknowledge and understand. But it's one of those things where for a long time, it just was what it was because it was that before. And there was no other reason for it to be like that other than it was the year before. And so we're struggling with that right now. I shouldn't say struggling. We are dealing with it. We're reconciling with it. And we're really trying to do things different and better. And that includes things like the land acknowledgement and diversifying our staff and our board. But also includes, that's another one of the reasons why we decided that it was not worth just to focus on forests and outlying areas. We need to focus where people live, and we need to focus where communities who typically have not had opportunities. We need to focus on using our power and our strength to provide those opportunities and to make sure that they're adequately and equitably distributed.
Excellent. I think that is really well put, all of you guys. Kai, you're headed
Thank you
out.
for the time. I appreciate it. If anyone on this call participating here or out in the, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available to talk preservation, talk Seattle, talk Tacoma anytime. So I appreciate it. Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Kai.
you.
Thanks, Kai.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. Along with that, I think I just wanted to also iterate, going off the question that we just had, that absolutely, I think one of the largest things of dealing, of working in fields that relate to history or things even like real estate, which can connect to redlining and histories of non-inclusion in certain spaces, that all of these larger systematic and histories that are extremely complicated can be dealt with and addressed in our current actions. And I can absolutely see how that is coming through in your guys' work. So very cool to see the strategies that you guys use. On that, I don't think that we have any questions from Facebook. I'm checking real quick. But Kathleen, did you have any thoughts or questions that you noticed from this presentation that you wanted to share before we head off?
I wanted to mention that I think I think the Asbury House is having an event on September 22nd. I gotta get that phone off.
You may be right. I have recently got back from PTO, and I did get an email from Cynthia, but I've not dug into it yet. She wants me to be a part of an event, she says. So my guess is that is correct.
Okay, well, excellent. We will, I will link a bunch of links to the Asbury website and Forterra, as well as Historic Seattle and Historic Tacoma, in case anyone wants to connect with you guys, ask any further questions, check out your guys' work. I think that, oh, actually, we might have another question in the Q&A.
I think Jay just corrected the date.
Perfect. Yes. Okay, excellent. Well, with that, I think that covers anything. Anything else you'd like to share?
I'm great. I really appreciate you having me on and being able to talk about this and kind of give both an update and also a kind of a strong view on how we think about these things. And I'll echo Kai. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody or answer any questions. Feel free to email or call, or if somebody wants the presentation, I can offer that as well. You have my stuff, so I'm more than welcome.
Okay, I guess that the Asbury House event is on the 25th of September, and there'll be more coming out about that. But basically, I'm just so interested in the work that both Forterra and Historic Seattle are doing. I think it's creative, it's energetic, it's problem solving, and it's a way to bring people together to create the kind of community that they want and that we want. So it's inspiring.
I'm just gonna put that slogan right on our website. That was really well done, Kathleen. That was good. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I was drawn to Forterra, and and honestly, what I do on a daily basis is just exactly what I want to be doing. It's really, I stress. I like to say it's really, really great work. I don't like to say it's important because that's subjective to a lot of different people, but for me, it's great and it's rewarding, and building trust and offering outcomes that a community can look at and be proud of are really important to me. So especially in the town that I live in, right? I get to work in Tacoma often on stuff, and it's a great feeling. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the work that you are doing. And thanks, Zoe, for facilitating this with the city. And thanks to the Tacoma Historical Society and Historic Tacoma for sponsoring it. I'm glad it's being recorded. I think it's going to be really useful to go back and and look at some of the tools that were laid out today. So
Great.
thank you.
Perfect.
All
That
right.
was the perfect ending. So on that, we're just going to say adios to everyone and thank you for attending.
Thank
Okay,
you. See you,
take
everyone.
care.